All right, welcome back to Southeastern 14. Back here for episode number 3 of House Summit, our new Lady Vols show here on Southeastern 14 YouTube channel. And as with me as always, of course, Nathanael Rutherford. We made it to episode 3. We joked on the last episode. We made it to 2. Now we're at 3. So we're doing something right.
Yep.
I mean,
Hopefully,
that's all.
hopefully, hopefully, not talking to avoid and think we're doing well.
Hopefully people are still watching. It looks like they are, so that's good to know. But yes, we appreciate the support and the feedback thus far, and we are on to episode 3 here, and obviously it's a big one because tournament time. And before we get there, though, Nathaniel, let's quickly get your thoughts on last week. Of course, last week our focus was mainly on South Carolina. We didn't say a lot about Kentucky, and turned out to be for the better, probably. That game went about it exactly as you would expect. But South Carolina game did not. We talked about sort of the recipe for success in that game. I thought the first quarter it started off the way we thought it should, but obviously did not play out in their favor from there. South Carolina wins it by 13 in that game, and yeah, I mean the script started the way we said it needed to start, but when you look at kind of the rebounding differential, some of those different things, just you have to make shots against South Carolina, and Tennessee just didn't make enough shots.
Yeah, like you said, the first quarter looked really good, and Lady Vols came out with a lot of energy, played really well in the first quarter, and really, I think, really punched South Carolina out. I don't want to say I don't think South Carolina expected it, because I think they did probably expect, for the Lady Vols to come out playing with a lot of energy, but then, maybe not quite to the degree they did. And then also Lady Vols were making shots and just looked really crisp on offense, and were doing pretty well in defense. And that first quarter, they did a good job on the boards. Yeah. Second quarter, though, I mean, South Carolina really just started to flex their offensive rebounding muscle. I mean, there was one possession, I think, where they got 3, if not 4,
I guess 3 rebounds. Or 4.
Yeah. That was just, again, wasn't a whole lot Lady Vols could do about it. I mean, it was just they were getting boxed out. Like it wasn't because they were not trying. I mean, South Carolina is just really good at rebounding. I don't know what else to say. They're not just LA of Austin. The entire team is exceptional at rebounding. So, yeah, we said it, or I said it going into that game. I feel like that was going to be the game that the Lady Vols missed Tamari Key the most, and I think that really reflected. I think if they had Tamari, I still think they lose, but I think it's a much different game, and especially with the ability to rebound inside and really alter shots at the rim that South Carolina had, because Lady Vols didn't have a whole lot of blocks in that game. South Carolina had several. I think they had more than Tennessee in that one. But if Tamari Key is in there, how much does she impact the rebounding? How much does she impact the ability to get shots right at the rim on second chance opportunities and stuff too? So, I mean, yeah, it went more or less kind of how I thought it would at the end, because I thought the Lady Vols would have had a chance. But to their credit, I mean, they didn't give up in the fourth quarter. I know some of that maybe was Carolina maybe letting off the gas maybe a little bit, but to their credit, I mean, they ended up outscoring South Carolina in the fourth quarter, and it could have been a lot worse, Blake, on the scoreboard. But Lady Vols did, put up more of a fight and I think play hard to the whistle. But man, those second and third quarters were just Carolina just dominated. And so, I mean, we talked about it. Carolina is just Carolina. I don't see a team beating them. I mean, unless they end up playing, unless like a Stanford or Utah or maybe UConn gets healthy and can play them well in the Final Four championship. But I mean, I just have a hard time thinking any other team that's not a 1 seed or a 2 seed is going to beat them. And even then, I mean, they played really good teams during the regular season and won all of them. I mean, they're just so good. It feels like one of those Geno UConn teams from 5, 6, 7 years ago that just marched through everything and beat everyone they played, and most of the time beat them down. I just don't see anybody beating them this year, regardless of who they play.
Yeah, I mean, that's like we said. If you look at kind of their overall resume to this point, I mean, they've had a couple. I mean, they talked about the Ole Miss game, but really outside of that, like it's just like we said, if they're at their best, there's no one beating them, and no one's beat them so far.
And they rarely have two like bad or down performances in a row. I mean, and I thought maybe with the way Lady Vols started that game that okay, maybe this is going to be an exception, but no, they bounced back. And I knew they'd bounce back. I just didn't expect them to bounce back maybe as strongly as they did in the second and third. But yeah, that's the thing is like even if they have a bad game, like they rarely have two bad or even two non-good games in a row. At least not this year.
Well, and I think it's just we talk about just the rebounding and their ability to rebound. Like that's just something that we said, right? Like just what can be the differentiator, like especially for like the top women's teams. And I think it's just their ability to rebound is pretty remarkable. So that is that's something getting them a chance to win every game because they're going to get easy opportunities that other teams just don't get. And I think that's kind of the biggest thing that stands out too. So we'll see. But all right, so that was South Carolina. Let's move on. Let's just get that one out of the way. All right, so we turn the page. Obviously, Lady Vols got to win against Kentucky by 20 to wrap up the regular season. I don't know if there's a lot to discuss from that, just based off of again, it's kind of what you expected. But if we take that win and the loss from last week, and we put it into bracketology, which is what we do here. We always go into that. And as you said on Twitter today, Nathaniel, you pointed it out, they have officially moved up again. So maybe that's the thing. We're 3 episodes in here. Lady Vols have moved up a seed line, I think, in every episode. Did they start as a 7 and they went to a 6 and they come to a 5?
I think they were a 7 when we first started. If they weren't, they were a low 6. Yeah.
Well, we're going to say they were a 7 because that way we can use that. They went from 7 to 6 to 5 now on 3rd episode. So if the trend continues, they'll be a 4 seed this time next week. But I do think that's a possibility, though, right? Because you now look at it. ESPN updated their bracketology on Tuesday, and they are now a 5 seed in the Chapel Hill part of the Seattle bracket, which Utah is the number 1 seed there in Salt Lake City. But Tennessee would be the 5. They've got South Dakota State as the automatic qualifier as the 12, which South Dakota State are they in the Summitt? I think they're in the Summitt. So they're there. North Carolina's the 4, so that's your 4-5 matchup in Chapel Hill. Green Bay as the 13 there. But again, I think and I think it was mentioned in the in Charlie's bracketology here is, I think basically what he says at the top of this is teams 14 through 21. So if you're looking at the S curve, which is obviously a part of the process of ranking the teams and all that, Villanova, North Carolina, Colorado, UCLA, Oklahoma, Tennessee, Michigan, Arizona are so tightly packed that plenty can change by the time championship games are played on Sunday in the ACC, Big Ten, Pac-12, and SEC. So that shows you that there is room to move up. Like because these teams are considered that close together. So for Tennessee, right, that now becomes part of the process as you go into the SEC tournament, which we'll talk about in a minute. But to see them go to a 5 now, that's encouraging, right? If you're a Lady Vols fan, and you see now there's opportunity to move up if you make a run in the SEC tournament, get into one of those top 4 seed spots, which we know the value of that, right? Because that means that you're going to get, games in Knoxville. And so I think that's certainly an interesting thing to think about. And hey, I mean, that's what you want to be doing this time of year, right? You want to keep moving up, and that's what they're doing at the moment.
Yeah, and I think Charlie even said that. I want to say it was at the halftime of. It wasn't the South Carolina game because they were focused on the last reveal of the top 16 seeds in that one. But I think the halftime of the Kentucky game on Sunday, he said that there's still a chance of, or wasn't even a halftime. It was like they had a little video segment that he did where he said it was possible, but not probable just yet that the Lady Vols could move up to a 4 seed. And I think that's a really good way of framing it because it would be contingent on them making a run, like getting at this point, since they have one of the double buys, it would be them getting to the SEC tournament final, which again we'll talk about in a second. But beating an Alabama, for example, isn't going to move the needle a ton. It'll be nice. It won't be it'd be a decent win. But to get to that next line, you're going to have to beat the second team you play, which will likely be an LSU. I mean, I don't see LSU getting beat by either their matchups there in the quarterfinals. But yeah, I think it would be pretty incredible for this team that started 2-4 and then 4-5 to play their way into getting into a top 16 seed in the NCAA tournament. That'd be a great bounce back and turnaround for the way this season started, especially. And then also, losing Tamari Key right around that same time too, in non-conference play. When you're arguably your I won't say your best defender, but kind of the person that helped the defense really solidify because she was such an anchor there in the paint and what you could do and prevent teams from driving to the basket. That's been a thing that's bothered the Lady Vols more this year, is that teams have been able to drive in the paint a lot more consistently because you haven't had the rim protector like Tamari Key there to prevent that from happening. You look at something that gave Tennessee a lot of issues against South Carolina was they had Cardoso, who's the same size as Tamari, 6'6", 6'7". If Tamari had been in there, how different would that game have gone with her? And there's a lot of things you can point to, but my I guess main point is we had talked last week, Blake, about maybe it making more sense from a making a run in the NCAA tournament perspective to stay maybe in that 6th line.
Right. Yeah.
But that was in my thinking of if you're in the same bracket as a UConn or a South Carolina. If you're in the same bracket, if your number 1 seed is Utah, I mean, nothing against Utah. I just think that's a better, to me, they're not one of those teams that I feel like, can't be beat like a South Carolina or a team that Tennessee is going to struggle against like a UConn.
They play a lot of close games in the Pac-12.
Yes, so Utah and Stanford don't scare me as much as a 1 seed. So I don't mind being on the top half. Again, you'd like to try to avoid the 1 seed if you can, but those two teams don't scare me as much as a South Carolina or UConn does as a 1. Of course, right now I think actually is UConn might be they're a 1. Never mind. I don't know what I was thinking. No, they're not. They're Indiana's a 1 seed. That's right.
So they'd be the
I think
2
drop down to a 3 actually.
No, actually they are. I think you're right.
UConn's a 3
I'm
now.
trying to find them. I'm like, where are they? There they are.
They're in Greenville too. Yeah.
Yes, they're a 3. So yeah, they're paired with Louisville, the 6th seed. Virginia Tech's the 2.
Regardless, I think then in my opinion, then the only to me team you want to stay away from is South Carolina. Then at that point, I don't even care what other region you're in as long as you're not in Greenville 1. If you can avoid being the lowest ranked of any of the seeds, that's great. Because I guess though the best Lady Vols might be able to do is to be the lowest ranked 4. Because right now you have Colorado, Villanova, Texas, and North Carolina as your 4 seeds, according to Charlie Cream. Again, this is all based off his speculation and his projections, but those are the 4 that he has as the 4 seeds. I mean, I guess the Lady Vols could move up to maybe the second best 3 or second best 4, excuse me, which would put them in the the Greenville 2 region, which would be where Indiana is right now. So that's conjecture and all this sort of stuff. My main takeaway though is unless you're in South Carolina's bracket, I'm not quite as worried about being in the top half and staying maybe that 6th slot. If you can get to the 4 slot and be again a team like you said that hosts, that's huge. I think being able to host your first game and knock on wood, your second game as well in the NCAA tournament, that's huge in the women's game. I mean, I wish the men's did the same thing. I wish if you were a top 16 seed in the men's side, you got to host, but I don't think they'll ever do that because of money and stuff. But I think that'd be a lot of fun in the men's side of things to be able to do that. The women's side though, the home court advantage of being able to play, obviously a smaller school like last year. I mean, look at what happened last year when the Lady Vols hosted their first 2 games. That was a really fun first couple rounds last season when Tennessee got to host the NCAA, their tournament games. They made it to the Sweet 16. Like that game against Belmont, got a little dicey there, but that was fun. Like that was a fun game to watch, and the fact that you had the home crowd there, and of course, man, somewhat I wouldn't say split, but you had obviously a decent amount of Belmont fans there too because it's in state. So I think seeing things like that, I love the fact that the women's game allows them to host if you're a top 16 seed. I think that would just be, for the way this team has fought back and the adversity they fought through this year, and with especially the struggling start they had, I think the fans would love to be able to go out and support them again for at least hopefully 2 more games to send them off, hopefully to a Sweet 16, but to send off the seniors and this team in general just to, an NCAA tournament run. So again, we'll talk about the SEC tournament here in a second and the odds of that happening, but it is going to be contingent upon a SEC tournament run. And I don't know. It'll be interesting to see what happens there. But again, as Charlie Cream noted, there's a lot of those teams packed in there in that kind of 22 to 14 range, as he said. And who knows where the chips are going to fall. What Tennessee doesn't make a run, someone else could. There's going to be a lot of movement though in that range, and those last 3 or 4 spots of that the 4 seed range. They're going to be up for grabs, and there's going to be potentially a ton of movement between now and Selection Sunday for the women's game.
Well, and keep in mind too, and I was looking this up because I knew the number was high, but 15 ranked teams lost last week. So
I felt like it was a lot. Wow,
15. So keep that in mind, because look, when we talk about teams, right? You mentioned like Utah, and I said like Utah is a team that, yes, they're 25-3, but they played a lot of close games. And I give them credit; they've won most of those games. They just came off a win where they beat Stanford. So that was obviously a big game. Both are still number 1 seeds, but they just sort of got their revenge. They split the season series of those 2, but it is a team that has played some pretty close games. And so I think that's something to look at if you want kind of an SEC tie in there. They played Alabama early in the season, beat Alabama 93-86. So that's just one example, but the parity is there in terms of ranked teams losing. And so I think it is kind of, because look, if UConn's a 3, right? As I said, like UConn still, I know they've lost some games they usually don't, you're not used to that from UConn. You're not used to seeing them lose some of these games that they've lost, but yeah, you're still going to have a lot of probably trust in this team, just based on what they've accomplished over the years and they're, just all that kind of stuff. So it is an interesting dynamic here, but that does kind of bring us into looking at the SEC tournament in general. Now, before we get there, the awards were handed out as always before the SEC tournament kicks off, and I don't think much of a surprise to kind of see South Carolina rack up a lot of the individual awards. That's not really a shocker there. Of course, Don Staley, Coach of the Year. Leah Boston is the Player of the Year, which none of those should shock anyone. You mentioned Cardoso earlier; she's the 6th Woman of the Year. And so again, to rack up Boston Defensive Player of the Year as well. So that makes sense. But I know Tennessee fans more keyed in on the first team All SEC, which we won't get me started, Nathaniel, on the SEC continuing to add 9 players on the first team All SEC and second teams. But that's another discussion for a different day. Everyone who's listened to me before on the men's side knows that I cannot stand that. But there are 9 players on the first team All SEC, including 2 Tennessee players. Kia Jackson is there, as well as Jordan Horston. Well deserved, I think. And again, joining them, quite a group, I think, when you look at it. Brittany Davis from Alabama, Alexis Morris from LSU, Angel Reese from LSU, Angel Baker, Ole Miss. We talked about Boston. Zach Cook's there. So, yeah, a nice group here on the first team All SEC.
Yeah, and I think both Horston and Rakia both deserve that. It's really, to me, it's not a surprise that Horston's there. It's also not a surprise, from preseason that Rakia Jackson's there. But it might, if you look back at the beginning of the year, it's been quite the journey for Rakia Jackson to get there. But she deserves it, every bit of it, from being a player who got, wasn't playing for a few games and then was coming off the bench to now back in the starting lineup. And then she's finished the regular season scoring 20 or more points in 6 straight games. That's quite the streak. And then of course, Horston does everything. Like, she rebounds, she steals, she blocks, she scores, she assists. Like, she's the do it all for the Lady Vols and has been for the last few years. She absolutely deserves it. I think both those players are going to be first round, potentially top 10 draft picks in the WNBA draft. But I think it's, it's really cool to see both of those players get that honor and both earn it. And again, I think it's especially really nice to see that Rakia Jackson got it with the way their season started out. Again, with a lot of questions and a lot of, what's going on behind the scenes. And again, her not playing at all. And then when she did come back, it was off the bench and seemed like it was a more limited role, to now being, to me, an undisputed. Like, to me, you can't question the fact that she's a first team All SEC. Especially with the way she played this last month of the season, of the regular season, at least. She was doing great before that even, but the last 6, 7, 8 games, she's just been extremely, extremely good. So yeah, it's well deserved. And like you said, seeing all the South Carolina players on there, and of course Don Staley, not a shocker, but there's just so much talent in the SEC.
Oh yeah.
And so you're listening to some of those names, like, man, there's just
the second team really is good too. We talked about some of these. Look at, like we mentioned in recent games, just breaking down, previewing the games. Like Aaron Barnum's there on the second team from Arkansas. Aisha Coulibaly's there from Auburn. We talked about kind of those two in recent weeks as we've kind of broke down the games. You've got players like Haley Frank from Missouri. There's a lot of players that, I don't want to say like some of these players are underrated, but like you just said, like, it's a really good group of talent. And so when you look at it,
if they were in another league, they'd be a first teamer. Probably.
Right. And it is like, it's one of those things when you look at, and so, I was kind of, half joking earlier about, but look, it's good, like, to get the recognition for all these players, even if you have to make, 9 players on each team. But again, that's like you just said, right? Put these players in another conference and their first team All SEC, but they just happen to, be the 10th person or the 11th person in the, the All SEC this year in terms of bouncing between the first team and the second team. So,
yeah, that's a very talented league. I think that's also, I think we're going to have this conversation at some point, probably at an off-season podcast, but about kind of I guess it's definitely not the majority, but the minority fan reaction negatively to Kelly Harper, at least from the, my point in all this is that, expecting a rebuild so quickly, I think, is, when you look at the landscape of women's basketball, and especially in the SEC now, it's a lot tougher than it was years ago. And I think it's, some people also would point to LSU and say, well, look what she took over and how they turned it around. And that's fair. I mean, I understand that's fair to point to that, but that's a exception, I think, to the norm of rebuilding. And look where the Lady Vols were when Kelly Harper took over. And the fact that last year was the first time you'd get, to the Sweet 16 in 5 years, I think 5-6 years. And this year was your best regular season finish in the SEC, 13-3 since almost a decade. That 2014-15 team that finished 15-1. So I mean, I understand the frustrations, and I totally think there are fair critiques and criticisms to be had for this team and for this coaching staff. But when you kind of take a step back a little bit and look at really just honestly how far the program had fallen, not that they were destitute, they didn't reach Tennessee football levels by any means in terms of how far they'd fallen, but when you look at kind of the highs that the Lady Vol program had been and to where they were when Holly Warlick was let go, I mean, it was a pretty night and day difference compared to where they were in the 90s and early mid 2000s, and when they won the last titles in 07-08 compared to where they were when Kelly Harper took over. So I mean, there was a lot to dig out of and to get try to repair and fix. And I just think it's I think there are plenty of, again, fair criticisms to be had. I just think sometimes people go too far, but I know that's a topic I'd like to discuss more in detail in a future one. Right now we've still got plenty of season left, Blake. We got SEC tournament and NCAA tournament to play, so we've got the season ain't over yet, and it's postseason time, which is it's crunch time.
Yeah, it's crunch time. You did. I wanted to touch on something you brought up earlier before we get into the SEC tournament. You mentioned Jackson and Horston. ESPN's latest WNBA mock draft, which is, I think it was from a couple weeks ago, but probably not much has changed, right? As Rakia Jackson going 5th to the Dallas Wings and Horston going 6th to the Atlanta Dream. So, yeah, I mean, you're talking, cool. Yeah, I mean, that would be nice, wouldn't it? So you are talking about, I think, 2 surefire top 10 picks in the draft. So I think that is, again, and that can lead us into the next thing, because we are going to get into the SEC tournament. And when you have 2 people like that, that can lead you very far in tournament play. And I always talk about the value of star players, especially in tournament situations where you expect, it's a neutral court, different atmosphere, different, setting, different shooting background, like all these things that go into playing, neutral court type games in an SEC tournament setting. And so I think that is kind of something that's interesting as you look at it. So the setup is this. Obviously, South Carolina is the 1, LSU's the 2, Tennessee's the 3, and I'm actually going to pull this up on our screen right now so you can see the bracket and kind of go along with us as we're looking at it. But you kind of look at the setup here, as we said. Tennessee's the 3, Ole Miss is the 4. Tennessee's path, pretty clear when you look at it, right? It's a team that, and I will see if I can zoom in on this a little bit if it lets me. That way we can kind of maybe zone in on the bottom half a little bit. This is definitely a work in progress here, folks, because I'm not usually putting stuff on the screen, but I want you to be able to see it. So Tennessee's going to play the winner of the Alabama, which is 6th seed, either against Florida or Kentucky, the 11-14. My guess is Florida wins that game, but you never know in SEC tournament play. So what do you think, Nathaniel? We talked about it earlier. The best part of this bracket to me is South Carolina's up there on top and not down here near the bottom with Tennessee. So I honestly think like 3rd is about as good as you could have asked for. And we said that was pretty much how it was going to wind up. Because, again, you are getting a potential semifinal matchup against LSU instead of having to go through South Carolina to get to the championship game. And as you mentioned a second ago, that's important in this instance, because if they can get to the championship game, I think there's a very good shot that they're going to move into one of those top 4 seeds.
Yeah, I think the matchup in their first game of the quarterfinal is going to be really interesting, because I don't, like you said, I assume Florida's going to be Kentucky. And if they do, they're a strange team. I feel like there's a good chance they could beat Alabama. I like Tennessee's chances in either of those matchups, Alabama or Florida, but either one would kind of present, obviously, kind of different issues. Can look at it more whenever it happens. Obviously, we won't be recording a show when it happens, I guess, but I'll look into it more personally when the game time comes. But I think Lady Vols should be able to advance from that. I would assume LSU takes care of business against either Georgia or Auburn. Yeah, I don't think either one of those 2 teams are equipped to beat LSU. However, Blake, I would very much look forward to seeing a rematch between Tennessee and LSU in a neutral site, because I think part of that game, Lady Vols played that game really close, and they did a good job in that game of kind of frustrating LSU and keeping Angel, for the most part, keeping Angel Reese kind of away from being Angel Reese that she'd been this season. And until I think kind of late, things kind of started falling apart a little bit. But I think part of that too, I'm going to be honest, Tennessee didn't lose this game because of the officiating, but there was definitely, I think LSU gets a home whistle, especially now with as rowdy as the environment is there, and as much as they're excited about the women's program again, because Kim Mulkey has them, playing at a very high level. I do think they get a home whistle. I think every team gets for the most part, gets a home whistle. But I think there are some calls or maybe non-calls that in that game that were a little questionable. But even still, Lady Vols fought back in that game, and that game was close and competitive for pretty much the whole game. I seen that on a neutral court is going to be fun. I really genuinely hope both teams make it to that semifinal, because I want to see that matchup. I mean, heck, if Georgia Auburn wants to upset LSU, I'm not going to complain. If Tennessee has to play one of those teams, I'm not going to complain. But then again, you could run into the chance of what happened with Kentucky last year, where obviously look at the seeding, and you think, okay, Lady Vols got a break and play Kentucky. The Kentucky just happened to be the hot team and went on and won the whole
There's
thing.
going to be one of those. It's just like you have to expect it. There's going to be somebody that gets hot. You just hope you don't run into that team. Like
This year, I feel like if they run into South Carolina this year, whoever the hot team is ain't going to win. I mean, to me, Lady Vols can make it to the title game. I mean, they could win. I mean, again, neutral site, who knows what happens, but I would just be surprised if anybody, again, beats South Carolina. I don't care who it is. But I think, like you said, if the Lady Vols win their first game in the quarterfinal, which again, that will not be easy, that whichever team they play is going to be tough out, and they play LSU most likely in the semi, that's also definitely not a guaranteed victory. But if they get that win, Blake, I do think you're right. I think they are in as a 4 seed. It will depend on what the other, projected, perceived 4 seeds do in their tournaments and stuff. Because if like North Carolina goes out, wins the ACC tournament, for example, they're probably staying as a 4 seed. If where are the other 4 seeds? If Texas goes and wins their tournament, it depends on what the other 4 seeds do. I don't think Colorado wins theirs, but I guess they could. But anything can happen in tournament time. But I just think that if you get to the SEC tournament title game as Tennessee, that's going to be enough. You're going to get a decent quality, probably quad 2-ish, maybe even quad 1 win, depending on who you play in the quarterfinal. And then if you beat LSU, obviously that's a quad 1 win, and for sure. So then that gives you 2 quad 1 wins in tournament play. And that should matter. Again, if this is the men's side and you're playing the day of, the couple of days before the selection, apparently that doesn't matter in the men's side. The women's side, the big tournaments or big conference tournaments play before the smaller ones. So I think matters more what they do. So it's gonna be interesting because, like you said, it's rarely does it go the exact way you expect. Because I don't think we'll see all 4 top seeds advance to the semifinals.
You want to know who my hot team choice is right now?
Who's that?
And I don't know if Tennessee should be rooting for this, because I think they should root for playing the highest seeds because of what you just said, because you want to get more quality wins. I think Georgia is a team that I would keep an eye on here. I know they've got the matchup against LSU, but this is a team that you kind of look at how they played down the stretch here, right? They're another team like early in SEC play. I think they start 2-5, I think it was.
But not good. Yeah, they just started.
You look at what they've done since then. They have won 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. They've won 7 of 9. Their 2 losses, by 5 at LSU. They lost by 10 at South Carolina on Sunday. So I think Georgia's a team that could be interesting here. Now, I'm not saying
they took LSU to overtime too.
Yeah, and so I think that is something that I would look at. But again, I think if you're Tennessee, though, obviously Tennessee's first order of business is beating the winner of Alabama or Florida or Kentucky, whoever it is. And if you look at some of those results, Tennessee beat Alabama. What was that? That was way early in conference play, like the first or second. That was the second game of the season, wasn't it, in conference play?
I think so. It was pretty early.
I think that's right. They beat them by 13. It didn't feel that close at times, from what I can remember. They beat Florida. That was the first game in conference play. So back-to-back potential here. They beat them by 10. Yeah, so
it's 10 and 13, because that's right. They started SEC play winning a bunch by double digits.
So I don't know exactly what you can take away from those games. Obviously, there are players on each side. We talked about Brittany Davis being on the first team All SEC. for Alabama. And so, there are obviously some interesting matchups on both sides. But I do think if you're Tennessee, even though I think Georgia may be the team to keep an eye on here, you're rooting for all the favorites to win because that gives you the best chance. And here's the thing, right? We talk about Tennessee moving into the top 4. Let's say they beat Alabama, lose to LSU in the semifinal. Well, it also is going to matter what the teams around them are doing. So if a lot of other teams are losing too, who knows? Maybe there's enough there to push them up. I think they have to win too, though, in my opinion. Whether it is that combination of an Alabama and LSU, or again, maybe a Georgia gets hot. If they just get to the championship, I think there's a really good shot they're going to be a top 4, a 4 seed. I don't want to say like they're not moving above a 4, I don't think right now. But, so I think that's really what's at stake here. And like you said, you just hope that that's valued. I think it will be because I think sometimes we get a little, the men's side of things, as we said, can be so head scratching. I don't think it'll be the case here. I think it will be pretty clear that if they can win these two to get to the championship game, I think they got a really good shot. But like we said too, it also matters what other teams do around you. So I am fascinated. But like you said it a second ago, and I guess I kind of followed it up with the Georgia pick. But I'm with you. I think South Carolina is going to be fine, but I don't know that I'm going to see all four seeds moving into the semifinal. I think someone is getting upset somewhere. So
Yeah.
I hopefully that's not Tennessee, right?
I hope not. But like you were saying though, I mean, they likely play Alabama. That's not going to be easy. I'm looking at the net rankings right now, and of course, South Carolina is 1, LSU is 2. Lady Vols are 15, Ole Miss 24, and then Alabama is 28th, and of course they're the 6th seed, and Mississippi State's
Alabama's
5th seed.
struggling, right? Like
they're struggling right now. That's
3 in
true.
a row,
Right.
and but right, you never know. This could this what we just said, right? This can be where a team, let's say they come out and play well against Florida or Kentucky, and then all of a sudden they find their groove again.
Yep.
Yeah, that's what you worry
Could
about.
happen. But then again, like they could also be beaten by Florida or Kentucky. So
Yeah,
it's
right.
it's just But I was gonna say the point though is that there's what 4 there was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 SEC teams in the top 40 of the net, and another if you add Arkansas, and they're 8 in the top 50. So like there's just really good. There's maybe not as high quality depth in terms of like the very top end this year as there has been in years past in the SEC. Right now, it's basically the South Carolina LSU as a clear cut number 1 and 2. But that 3 through 8, like there's a really good amount of quality opponents that all those teams, or most of them likely, are making the SEC NCAA tournament. I think Arkansas right now, as you mentioned last week, are still in the last 4 out category or around there. Their first 4 out, excuse me. But like those are still good quality teams that Tennessee is not going to be guaranteed a victory in whoever they play in the quarterfinal, whether it's Alabama or Florida. I mean, like you said, though, Georgia, I think on the rise, they're a top 35 net team that has had some quality wins. And like you said, it seems like they're playing a lot better now. And the only 2 losses they've had in the last almost month have been to the 2 best teams in the SEC. And one of them that took the overtime, and the other one was a 10-point loss, which is kind of saying something against South Carolina, and with both those games on the road too for Georgia.
Yep. No, it's an interesting setup here. I just think it's going to be fascinating to see how it plays out. And like we said, there's clearly you at least like to be in the spot where you go into a tournament where something is at stake. Outside of just winning the conference tournament, right? Because like we said, there's going to be a lot of people who feel like that's probably not a realistic possibility based on the fact that South Carolina is there. And I think it's just one of those things where like you have to find other things to sort of lean on. And I think at least for Tennessee, it is leaning on that possibility of getting a top 4 seed, knowing that that is still in play. And I would be surprised if it's not right now, because based on the quality win opportunity that is available to them. So I think that is certainly a big part of it. All right, here's what we're going to do to wrap it up. And I didn't even tell you we're going to do this, but I'm going to put you on the spot. And we're going to have fun going through the bracket here and making our picks for the entire SEC women's tournament. So,
okay.
All right, we're going to see how this goes. All right, here we go. Starting at the top, 12 Vanderbilt, 13 Texas A&M. We're going to see how many of these we get right. I'm going to log our answers here.
I'm going to go with Vandy.
All right,
they have a star, so I'm going to go with Vandy.
I'm going Vandy too on that one. All right, number 11 seed Florida, 14 seed Kentucky.
Florida.
Yeah, I'm going Florida too. Arkansas is the 8, Missouri's the 9. I got Arkansas. Missouri's not playing well.
No, they're not. That's true. Yeah, you dissuaded me from picking Missouri, so I'm gonna pick Arkansas too.
I don't know, that's an interesting one because those 8-9 games we've seen. Not to say that Arkansas has been great, right? Like they've not played well either, but I tend to think I think I trust Arkansas a little bit more. So that's why it's the 8-9 game, right? So
Yep, right.
all right. Let's see. So that takes it down to Mississippi State, the 5, Vanderbilt's the 12.
I mean, I'm gonna take State on that one.
I thought you may do that. I think that's probably the right pick. I'm looking back at some results here. Yeah, they played in the regular season. Mississippi State won 72-44. So seems like some sort of schematic advantage there in that one. All right, Georgia the 7, Auburn the 10. You know where I'm going.
Yeah, I'm going to same place you are, Georgia.
All right, Alabama's the 6. We got Florida's the 11 advancing. What do you think? Are you going to pull the upset here, or are you going to go with Alabama?
There's just something about Florida that feels weird to me. Like I think they're either going to make that close and win, or they're going to get blown out. Like I don't think there's going to be a whole lot of in between. Maybe
I'm just wrong, beat Alabama by 4 about a week and a half ago.
That's what I'm saying. Like they're a weird team. I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna pull the trigger and say Florida gets the upset.
All right. I mean, they did it the last time around, and
I know it's hard to beat the same team twice, but
well, here's what's interesting about that game. And look, I'm sorry I didn't get a chance to watch that one, but Florida won by 4. But here's what's interesting about that: Alabama shot 53% from the floor. They went 12 of 18 from 3. On the road, they went 12 of 18 from 3. They only got out rebounded by 5. But what was the difference, Nathaniel? What do we always say? You can't turn the ball over. Turn the ball. Well, free throws too, but you can't turn the ball over. Alabama had 20 turnovers. Florida got the free throw line 36 times in that game. So
that'll do it.
You're going the other way. I'll stick with Alabama because I got a bigger upset coming, and you know where that's going to be at. So all right, South Carolina the 1, Arkansas the 8. Are you feeling it? Are you
South Carolina?
Okay. Ole Miss the 4, Mississippi State's the 5. That's an interesting game.
I actually think State pulls it off. I've not been as impressed with Ole Miss this year as I think some people have been. I'm going to say State pulls off that upset.
I like that one. I don't know where I'm going with that one. Let me see here. Obviously, Ole Miss just had the close call against South Carolina. Ole Miss beat Mississippi State by 11. All right, to be different, I'll pick Ole Miss because I'm going to pick my upset elsewhere, as I've already said. All right, LSU's the 2, Georgia's the 7. Come on, man. I've got to have somebody other. We said the top 4. If you're going to pick against somebody, I'm going out on a limb here. I'm sorry, but like I'm gonna go Georgia. I
think that is a really intriguing pick, and you almost convinced me to do it. I'm still going to pick LSU, but I think that's you made me a lot more borderline than I actually expected to, because I did not take into account how well Georgia had been playing, and then their 2 losses were to the 2 best teams, and again they were close. Like they took LSU to overtime. So I don't think it's a bad pick at all. I'm going to say LSU, but like I don't have nearly as much confidence in that pick as I did, just a few minutes ago.
Just 30 minutes ago. I've convinced you in a half hour. Don't come at me, LSU fans. We're having fun here. All right. Tennessee's the 2. Alabama is the 6. I don't remember. Did we pick? I think you picked Florida. I picked Alabama.
Regardless, I think Tennessee advances.
I agree with that. All right. South Carolina versus either Ole Miss or Mississippi State. I think we know where we're going there.
Yep. Carolina.
South Carolina to the championship game, still unbeaten. And I think in my scenario, Tennessee versus Georgia, I will take Tennessee to advance the championship game. I just feel like the bracket sets up well for them down here, especially if there is that upset opportunity. You going LSU or Tennessee?
I'm gonna be a homer and go for Tennessee, but not just because I'm joking about the homer part, but I do actually genuinely think playing on a neutral site, that game goes a little differently than it did in Baton Rouge, and I think I wish Tennessee had Tamari Key, and obviously they've been out here for months, but I just think the Lady Vols are playing better than they were when they first played LSU this year. I just think it's going to go differently. I think it'll be a different result. I think we'll have a Tennessee South Carolina title game.
I like that setup. And then championship game, we both got Tennessee South Carolina. I apologize. I'm going to pick South Carolina.
Yeah, I am too. As much as I hate to, I don't see the rematch there going to this. How I did the Tennessee LSU rematch. I think South Carolina wins that one.
Until someone beats them, I've got to give I've got to just pick them. And I mean, otherwise, like I need to see it before I can pick it. That's kind of the rule for me.
Yep.
So there you go. There are picks for the SEC women's tournament. We'll see. We didn't go too far out on a limb. I did with one pick, I suppose, but it's fine. It's all about having fun here. And that's what we do. And here, before we do it real quickly, I know it's a Lady Vols, but this goes into my pick I just made with Georgia. Do you know how many free throws LSU shot in their regular season or their overtime game against Georgia? 82-77. Do you know how many free throws LSU shot in that game?
I want to say it was at LSU, so probably like 40.
45.
I was close. Okay.
Georgia had 35 fouls in that game. Holy cow, man. That's a lot of fouls.
I mean, again, I know teams get home cooking everywhere, but like I just feel like people say referees in the men's side. I feel like LSU women just got such a home cooking whistle this year. And again, they were outright just a really good team, but like they got some help this year. I'm just it is what it is. I'm not trying to take anything away from them. They are a really good team. They lost one game for a reason, but I feel like they refs did us some favors. I feel like in some of those games.
Well, we'll see if my my Georgia pick pays off. My guess is probably not. So if you're someone betting the SEC women's tournament, let me just give you some advice. Do exactly the opposite of what I say when it comes to big upsets, because as you said, LSU 27-1 for a reason, and I think there's certainly a decent shot that, although we think there's always the possibility of an upset in these kind of tournaments, sometimes in the SEC women's tournament you just get the best teams, and hey, if you're rooting for the matchups, that's what you should probably root for, because Tennessee LSU rematch would be a lot of fun. Even a South Carolina Ole Miss game would be a lot of fun based on kind of recent results there in that one. So those are probably the ones you're rooting for if you're just a casual fan looking for it. But hey, my guess is if you're watching this, you're probably a Lady Vols fan. So root for fun and chaos, except for your part of the bracket. Don't do that there. So Nathaniel, as always, a lot of fun to kind of look at this tournament time. We just get a little more pep in our step. Because it is a lot of fun to look at all these possibilities. But it's a big week because, again, the team has something to play for. And I think it's going to be a lot of fun to see how it plays out.
I absolutely agree. I can't wait to see it play out. And again, hopefully it leads to Lady Vols getting to the title game. I mean, maybe they win it, but I just want them at least to get there, because if they get there, that means they've probably beaten two good teams and have only further improved their resume that's already fairly solid.
Yep. So we will be back with another episode next week. We'll see. We may try to shift maybe around do a little earlier next week, just based on the tournament bracket being out and all that. Give ourselves a chance to kind of dive into a little bit more. Don't worry, we're not going to pick the every game of the women's NCAA tournament, but I don't know if we'll do that. But we may pick some upsets somewhere and have some fun with that. But again, be sure, if you're watching this, hit that subscribe button. That's the way to get all these episodes of the House Summit, our Lady Vols show, here on the Southeastern 14 YouTube channel. Of course, along with it, you get a ton of other stuff, which is our continuous SEC men's basketball stuff. We've got SEC baseball, SEC football, of course. So a lot of stuff, multiple videos going up every day. So if you're a Tennessee fan, you want to check everything else out, hey, it's all there here on the channel. So again, we appreciate the great support for the show thus far. And again, hit that subscribe button, hit that like button. And we appreciate it again. And we will talk to you next week here on House Summit.